back to kind of like, where we're at today. Let's just say someone gets married.
Yes.
They, like you said, they bought a house or they bought some property that's like an investment property. Let's say they were 21 and they're, now they're 28. I don't know. It has accrued in value. They get married to a woman. She doesn't really have many assets, but they get married and then they have like 4 kids together, right? And then God forbid there's a divorce of some kind that starts to happen, like initiated by one or the other, right? She has raised those kids in the last 5 to 10 years. Like she's not been making money or, investing in new rental properties or anything. Her primary work has been the children.
Yes.
Maybe she's had some side hustles. He's been continuing to grow his income and the rental property is one of his assets. And now they're separating and she is going to need to be able to provide for those children when she has her shared custody of them or whatever. She's been out of the job market now for years, whatever. Anyways, my understanding, again, I'm not a family law attorney, so it would be interesting to have one on the show. Maybe I should. That's actually the next step. I think you should, But, she is entitled to some of his assets because even though she wasn't working and they didn't belong to them before they got married, because she has been providing something to the family unit that has an economic value that you can't write off as nothing.
But why would she be entitled to the premarital assets?
Well, that would be a question of like how much of it she's entitled to versus not. I think in part because
but perhaps an even more
in part because I would say they're growing in value, I would imagine, during their marriage.
But it's his.
But when he married her and she chose to invest so much of her time and heart in raising those children, like what is his became hers too, So I think that's
I think that's
the argument, right?
That in itself is the huge problem. And as long as the law remains that way, all that's going to happen is more men or women at this stage, because women are starting to have a lot of stuff. I think young women are actually more likely to have property than men are now. Then all that's going to happen is fewer and fewer people will get married because that's such a poor incentive.
Well, I think the biggest question is not even if they should divvy up that premarital asset they had before marriage, 2/3, half and half at all. The biggest question is if and when you get married, are you going into the marriage with concern about your assets and protecting them from the spouse that might go the wrong way? Or are you going into the marriage in terms of this is my one flesh I'm going to be committed to for life, and I'm going to really select the best spouse I can.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that people should get married with the state involvement and sign the papers and sign the legal contracts?
I think it's good to, provided you don't have some very defunct state. Because if I'm in like the Soviet Union and I'm getting secretly married underground by the Catholic Church, which is illegal, I'm not going to give this. I probably won't want the state involved in my marriage. I think, it depends on the country, but generally speaking, yes.
Why do you think having the state involved is important or good?
Because I think the purpose of the state, besides rule of law and defending and protecting basic human rights, is to create an environment for flourishing families. So there should be actually state incentives to get married.
But we have state disincentives to get married.
It depends who you're asking, because if you're talking to the woman who is giving up, so much of her physical body and her time and her life.
What if the woman has more assets than the man and she's the one who's got...
I think there's going to be endless scenarios that are unique about assets, about like this person had a little more money, this person had a little more money. But that's why I think the general principle about marriage should be all in, we're going to combine our assets. This is as a general principle, right? Again, I'm not saying there aren't some cases where it could be as an exception, not a rule. Perhaps prudent, especially if the country you live in has some crazy laws, to have some sort of premarital agreement. But I think generally speaking, whether you're wealthy or poor, entering a marriage should be an exercise of an all-in.
But we live in a time where...
Because that's the nature of marriage. It's the nature of marriage.
It's supposed to be, but it's not.
But it's not.
In the U.S., the divorce rate, let's take the average of the things people say. It's hovering around 40%. It's hovering around 40%. So
at large, but when you break that statistic down and you look at different groups,
for sure.
Divorce is much higher around. Like if you're a group that selects to marry in a certain way, has certain values, has certain behaviors and practices,
you can bring it down.
Your outcomes are much better, meaning there's much lower rates of divorce. So if you just take a general population at large and you say, well, they're all divorcing, so they all should have prenups, I think that's not making for a good plan for that society to advance.
Well, I don't understand the opposition to. So the reason I'm in favor of prenups is because, number one, a huge question with all of these things I'd ask is, well, why leave that up to the state? Why leave that up to the states and the courts? So if the people getting married, if they do want to go more all in and they want to consider premarital asset and join everything together, my point is you, the couple, rather than lawyers and this web of whoever it is, you can make all those agree. You just say what we agree. This is what it is. Your prenup can be as simple or as complicated or whatever it is. So I think a major part of it is to even force these discussions and avoid future arguments. Finances and assets, those are one of the biggest things that tear people apart in relationships, in marriages, and so on. This can even involve people outside of those two individuals, other family members. You mentioned inheritances, all this kind of stuff. If you own a company or you're a member of a company and so on, all of these things get increasingly complicated. So what you can do is you can just create a prenup in a way that actually incentivizes better behaviors as it currently stands with no-fault divorce laws. So you're saying, okay, people come together and everything becomes one. You can have a situation where, okay, that happens. 4 years later, 5 years later, someone's like, okay, I'm bored, peace, I'm gone. That's totally legal to do. And then it's like, oh, and I'm taking half your stuff with me. That should not be incentivized. That like the fact that that's even possible that should not be possible. That's my point. It's like that should not even be possible. So I totally agree with you of how marriage should be approached and what the covenant should mean and so on. I'm just saying we live in a very, very deeply fallen world and society where that is not the case. So one of the reasons why I'm in favor of normalizing prenuptial agreements is because I think it will actually encourage more marriage, because until some of this legal framework and some of these giant gaping holes are patched up, which are providing perverse incentives for people to break up their marriages and break up their families because they can be rewarded for it financially, that shouldn't, I'm just saying that shouldn't, you can close those gaps. You can close those gaps yourself, and you can do that as a couple rather than, long-term, again, hopefully everything works, but it goes through this whole mess, and now there's all this animosity and resentment, and there's fighting, and it's super expensive, and it's crazy, and it's horrible for everyone. It's just like, why not just state up front what it is and make sure that all parties are incentivized to do this. It also provides peace of mind. Let's take the extreme example. Let's take an Elon Musk. Someone with his level of any woman he marries, in the back of his mind, there's always going to be a concern of, is she with me for me, or is it because I'm Elon and I've got, I'm worth $300 billion and I own all these companies, I have all these assets, whatever it is. I think it also just provides the peace of mind for that person, because it's like, people say, okay, you shouldn't have a prenuptial agreement because it means that you think divorce is even an option. And it's like, well, it cuts both ways, because if divorce is not even an option, what's the opposition to having it? What's the opposition to just agreeing something and saying, okay, look, we are absolutely in this. We are absolutely in this together, whatever. I know that we're both well-meaning. To me, it's additional trust. It's the opposite of mistrust. It's actual additional trust where you can sit there and say, okay, cool. Like, we love each other. We're going to do this. This is not about, imagine Elon, it's not about my money, my assets, what you could potentially get from me or whatever. We're just doing this thing. We want to raise this family. We want to stay together. So I think it can be done in a way that it incentivizes the good behavior rather than incentivizes bad behavior. It's a real problem having these perverse incentives where it's like you can break your vow and be rewarded for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think practically speaking, I would be interested if there's data about like people who are getting prenups, these like very carefully crafted, individualized prenups that you're recommending, and are they more likely to have these successful marriages? I mean, I don't know that there's data that shows that.
I don't know that there. It would probably be quite hard to get data on, and it would be hard to do because it's multivariate. So you'd also need to somehow like filter out religiosity and filter out like all the other variables. You see what I mean? I think
that's the problem I have with the prescription you're giving, and that tweet. And that was my problem with the tweet. It's one thing to have a very exceptional case of someone like an Elon Musk who has multiple businesses.
I don't think it needs to be that exceptional at all.
Well, or someone who's like a widower with adult children, and you could kind of craft up these very unique cases.
What about people with previous children?
We could talk if there are children and, the justice that's owed to those children versus, children you may have with your new marriage and like whatever, right?
Yeah.
The challenge I have is this prescription of if you are wealthy, you need a prenup. And I think because you might have some woman that you marry who's not as wealthy who wants your money in the future. And I think that's... or if you're a wealthy woman, I guess you could say the same. And I think that's where I think we're sending the wrong message and it's the wrong principle upon which to enter marriage. Now, just to be clear, there are existing, I understand, in our legal system, different ways to protect assets, different ways that family who pass on wealth protect assets, that are affected or not affected by marriage or divorce. So, again, we don't have that family law attorney here.
Sure. Do you have a problem with those?
Well, not necessarily. Okay. I mean, I would want to look at the individual ones, but I haven't seen something where I'm like, well, that seems unjust.
Sure.
What does seem unjust is someone who goes into a marriage saying, I've got to protect this money from
Why
my
is that
spouse.
Unjust?
Because when you go into a marriage, I believe
you mean it's immoral. You think it's a moral issue?
I mean, I think it's an issue of the nature of what should be the nature of marriage. Is it a true marriage where you're going in with full commitment?
Can I give a hypothetical? And it might sound a little crazy. If it were the case that somehow, by magic, if marriage was just like, okay, in the event of a divorce, both people or one person gets sick and dies.
So they have divorced already?
No. Let's say that theoretically, in the marriage laws, it was that if a divorce takes place, then one person gets imprisoned for life.
Okay, so you're saying it's like this special penalty that the law has.
Yeah, let's say the consequence of divorce was imprisonment.
Okay, for the person who did the divorce.
Let's say for both.
Okay.
Let's say for both. Let's just take an extreme because I'm just trying to understand something.
Okay.
And let's say you could create an agreement that says, okay, I think that's a bit extreme and unfair. We can
undo that with a prenup.
We can make an agreement which undoes the thing that says in the event of a divorce, we both end up in prison for life.
Would I be okay with that? As you're asking?
Yes,
of course, and because
the consequences are
because it would be unjust to have a law that says if you
so if you think
but let me just to explain. Sorry, to explain. So we're using this term prenup and throwing it around. A lot of it depends on what is the purpose of the prenup and what does the prenup says.
Agreed.
Back to your tweet and what I understand your position to be, the purpose of it and the sort of spirit behind it is I have wealth. It's not fair that this woman I'm going to marry gets a significant portion of my wealth that I accrued before her. Therefore, I'm going to protect it from her in case things go south.
Okay, this is not my position.
So then I misunderstand you. So help me understand your position.
So I think the primary benefits of a prenuptial agreement, like I said, I think number one is actually to prevent potential arguments, not just within a couple, but also amongst family members, of in-laws, all that type of stuff. Also, as I've said, if you have potential inheritances, if you have a business, if you have business partners and so on, there's many places where they're like, okay, you can get married, but there's got to be some type of prenuptial agreement because there's you're plugged into all of these other things. We've already talked about people potentially already having children. I think people insure everything else. People insure health, people insure their cars, people insure all these things that are far less important than their marriages. So it's additional peace of mind. As I've said, I think it also...
So you're saying it's insurance. So you're saying, I misunderstand you because it's not about protecting your wealth. It's about insurance to protect the wealth.
I don't like the concept of life insurance. It doesn't make me feel good. I don't like to think of the idea of, oh my gosh, like if I die or I'm incapacitated, like I'm kind of planning for my death. Like,
but there's no moral issue with it, right? Like, it's
no,
not like,
I don't have a moral issue with it. I'm just saying, because a lot of people with their pushback against prenuptial agreement, it's largely an emotional reaction. It's an emotional
I don't think for me. I think it's
maybe not in your case.
What I think in my case it is, again, like going back to the tweet and what I understood your position to be. But again, I'm trying to maybe I misunderstand it, which is that if you are a man of means or a woman of means, and you are entering a union, you should ensure that you can protect those means in case something goes wrong in the union. And I think that general approach to marriage is not a good one.
Okay, so
and not one we should be recommending at large. That's my position.
Yes.
And it's not because of an emotional thing. It's because I think that people should be entering marriage not only with the all-in spirit of full commitment, without the sort of trapdoor of I can get out of this later, but also with an understanding that what you do with a marriage is not just about satisfying each other and having fun together.
Agreed.
You build a family together.
Agreed.
And a family project, all your resources you should make available to that family project. Like that is the purpose of your resources should be not your own personal pursuits and pleasures, but the family project. And the family project needs both spouses to lead it. So to sort of like siphon off part of your just to finish, just to siphon off part of your resources from the other spouse to say, yeah, I'm doing this family project with you, but I'm not going all in with my resources because I want to protect them from you in case something goes south. I think that's the wrong posture for not just for her sake of the wife, but for the kids. And if God forbid there is some sort of separation in the future by choice of one or the other or both, the work that you did together in that family project, I think needs to be honored. And I think assets, generally speaking, maybe not all, again, this is where even family law recognizes that not all assets are on the chopping block necessarily. Well, like inheritances and things like that, again, we'll have the family law attorney on. But, again, back to that, the reason we have a lot of the 50-50 going on, my understanding in law, is because when you do the family project thing, typically speaking, you build these rhythms in your household and your parenting where it's not equal economically. Like someone might be getting the paycheck, but the other person's contributing in a way that's not the paycheck.
Agreed.
And these things should not be so black and white in terms of, okay, well, I had this money, so I get to keep it afterwards.
So why not decide for yourself? Why leave it up to the state?
Well, I think if the state again is unjust in how they're doing things at large, and that's the thing. But that's where I haven't, I guess, and that's where we haven't landed the plane. So we're gonna have to do part two.